Enjoyed your lunch? Did you enjoy your lunch? Did you all get lunch? Yes? Okay, well, I got to tell you, you're welcome because it was our ministry that sponsored your lunch. Not yet. Okay, so I'm glad that you guys enjoyed the lunch. If any of you were able to sneak back in and catch the end of Dr. Williams' presentation, it was pretty awesome. But I've just been reminded, I had a question which reminded me to remind everybody that thanks to the awesome team from GIS, Linford, give me a wave. There he is, Linford. He is here videoing all of the sessions. And so all of the sessions are going to be available on the conference website after the conference is done. So big round of applause for Linford and the team at GIS. There you are. Oh, I thought that was you. So if you missed Dr. Williams' presentation, you only caught the end of it, and you were thinking to yourself, oh, I wish I could have seen all of it. Fear not, it will be available, and you'll be able to check it out at your leisure once it goes up on the website. Also, don't forget, you can like our Facebook page as well. The conference has a Facebook page, so the updates will be on there, and you'll get notified there too. All right, so we're going to move on now. We've got our next speaker is Dr. Ravi Kishore, who is the Chief Interventional Cardiologist and Electrophysiologist at Health City, Cayman Islands. He comes with over 15 years of experience in cardiology and serves as the Chief Interventional Cardiologist and Electrophysiologist at Health City. He completed his studies in 1995 and has worked in various hospitals across southern India, and he established the first dedicated electrophysiology unit in Hyderabad Medicity Hospital in 1995, and it was among the first in the country to introduce RF ablation for heart arrhythmias and ICD therapy. Since 1997, he has teamed up with Dr. Devi Shetty and has been instrumental in establishing state-of-the-art electrophysiology services across the Narayanas group of hospitals. His wealth of knowledge comes from his rich experience in simple and complex ablations and device implants. He also manages Narayana Health specialty clinics for heart failure, device and arrhythmia, and resistant hypertension. In addition to Dr. Ravi's strong academic background, he has authored several articles and abstracts published and presented on national and international levels. Dr. Ravi brings this level of expertise to Health City, Cayman Islands to assist with leading the cardiology department, developing heart-related clinics, and being the lead with the CAFE study on the Cayman Islands while looking at the prevalence of AF within the region. Today, Dr. Ravi is going to talk to us about heart disease and nutrition, the myths and the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ravi Kishore.
So let me learn to operate this first.
That's forward.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And so what's an electrophysiologist talking about nutrition, right? It's the first question it's the first question I had to, how am I qualified to talk on the very important topic of nutrition? And when I started preparing for this particular lecture, I realized that yes, there is a lot to be learned and a lot to be discussed on this very important fact. So in the next 30 minutes or so, what I will be highlighting is mostly the facts rather than the myths, and we'll highlight on some of the controversies that are dogging the nutrition world, especially with respect to the heart disease. And then we will have questions on myths, whatever you have. So let me move this across. Yeah. So I'm not able to see that at all. Yeah. Okay, fine. So first of all, a disclaimer. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a doctor. And let me also give you a take. During our medical training, we are hardly trained in nutrition. So it's a field which is really specialized. But I have realized that as a doctor, unless you are competent to a reasonable level in this very important topic of nutrition, you may not be able to guide your patients very clearly. And a disclosure is that I have nothing to disclose. I don't have any stocks in the companies which manufacture vegetable oils or any of the egg boards and avocado boards. So if I am supporting any diet, it's out of its merit. So the presentation outline, I will be discussing briefly about the diet-heart interaction, which we know was the fundamental basis of what we eat today, the whole concept. And then we will have a brief overview on the dietary classes, the micronutrients, the macronutrients, and the various foods, the dietary patterns, which is the main mantra of the day, and the studies of dietary interventions, which are recommending us what to eat, what not to eat, and the controversies, which are actually becoming very, very rampant day by day. And we'll conclude with some of the recommendations from the guidelines societies. So fundamentally, the heart disease, as we all know, is dominated by what is called as atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, which encompasses the heart attacks, the peripheral vascular disease, the blockages in the legs, and so on. And hypertension, we know it is related to the salt intake. We are taught very much right from your high school days, that salt and high blood pressure go in tandem. What is little known is there are other areas of the heart which are also independently influenced by what you eat. This is the atrial fibrillation and the occurrence of heart failure. These are independently influenced by a lot of substances we consume, and they may not be entirely related to the blockages or the hypertension. So this is a very simple slide. How do I light? Is there a light on this? The laser, this one? Yeah. So this is a cartoon which shows that how a heart attack develops. So the rest of the talk is going to dwell fundamentally on the most important aspect of the heart disease, that is the heart attacks, let's say coronary artery disease. So this is a cartoon representing how the blockages develop from the normal artery to an advanced blockage. And mind you, this blockage starts very early in our life with what is called as a fatty streak. I mean, you could see genesis of a fatty streak as early as 10 years of life. And then it progresses. So what does this contain? This particular, what we call in medical lingo as an atherosclerotic plaque, it contains a combination of fat and certain mixture of blood products called the platelets and fibrinogen, etc. So the thesis is that, is this fat coming from what we consume from outside, or is it being generated from within the body? This is an important issue which actually forms the basis of a lot of guideline recommendations. And this led on to what we call as the diet-heart hypothesis. This was formulated in about 60s based on an observation in a clinical trial that when people have a lot of saturated fat, their blood cholesterol goes up. But what is important is we very well know that when you eat a lot of fat, your cholesterol can go up, and the contrary, if you replace your fat with vegetable oils, which are safer oils, your cholesterol comes down. The thesis was that when this happens, your heart disease comes down. Just note that I have put it in this in kind of a dotted arrow. This is a dotted arrow, and this is a solid arrow. There is no doubt about that. You change your diet, you reduce your saturated fat, your cholesterol comes down. But the fact that whether this translates into reduction of heart attacks and reduction of the events related to coronary artery disease, there is really no proof. Similarly, we really don't have any proof whether such an alteration in diet would reduce your heart disease risk. Now, this is a fact which is being very much debated now. Now, fundamentally, what we need to understand again is that this hypothesis has made the framework for all the guidelines from all the international societies and the dietary policies across the globe that you reduce your saturated fat intake, you replace with unsaturated fats, and doing this is going to lower your cholesterol and reduce your heart attack risk. This is being debated very hotly nowadays. I will dwell upon it very briefly because it's a very confusing area in the nutrition world right now. So historically, the dietary recommendations, how the diet policies are framed by the government, this is very important. The diet policies, what are framed by the government, form the basis of a lot of expenditure on the socio-political front. And these have happened, how do I go back? Okay, these particular ramifications, it has a lot of ramifications in the socio-political front, the way the diet policy. So this has been done by observational studies and cohort studies. They're not really the randomized trials based on which you can be absolutely certain, yes, you do this change in your diet and this particular aspect of your disease process comes down. Like the previous speaker was very clearly telling, there's so many diets for every kind of cancers, but none of them have a robust proof. These are all based on observations, and these are based on large population screening, food frequency questionnaires, etc. So these form the basis, and the reliability of such studies in making the framework is always in question. So in the past 2 decades, what we have learned is that the dietary habits, what we have, can influence a lot of cardiometabolic risk factors. I will allude to it in the next slide. And the importance of specific foods rather than isolated nutrients is being increasingly recognized. Now, every one of you, if I ask you a question, heart attack is related to cholesterol or saturated fat. That's what you would say. Obesity is related to saturated fats. Scurvy is related to vitamin C deficiency, so on and so forth. So this ultra-simplification of our entire focus on recommending a diet has led to many of the concepts what we have, which are possibly misconceptions. The science of obesity, we are more aware of it now. It's linked to the rest of the cardiometabolic status, and we have a better understanding of the determinants of the dietary choices in the area where we live, the socio-political environment, the supply chain environment. All these factors influence the dietary choices. So your recommendations have to be regional rather than based on a global guideline given by a set of people based on random observations on the population-based studies. Now, this is what I was alluding to, that what we eat, the various substances, the refined grains, the fruit, vegetables, whole grains, all of them independently influence the various aspects of your cardiometabolic status, like the blood pressure, the glucose insulin homeostasis, etc., the satiety, hunger, obesity, and the food craving. All these are influenced by what you eat. And this understanding of that is making us better in terms of recommending the ideal food patterns. Now, briefly, the classes of nutrients, what we have, you could classify them as the macronutrients and the micronutrients. You have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats as the macronutrients, and these are the micronutrients. I'm going to dwell on the carbohydrates and fats. Really, we don't have a very strong link between proteins and the cardiac risk. It's been some very random observations that protein intake may improve the cholesterol homeostasis. I think more importantly, the protein could only substitute the saturated fats in your overall diet pattern. So it indirectly reduces your fat intake rather than having an independent impact on the cardiac health. So looking at the carbohydrates, what is important is, carbohydrates, we know it's simple carbohydrates like glucose, a complex carbohydrate like starches, but such a ultra simplification does not really impact on the health status. What is more important is the dietary fiber content. The glycemic index is how quickly the sugar rises when you take the rate at which the sugar rises when you consume this food, the glycemic load, and very importantly, the extent of processing, the amount of refined grain versus whole grains. These are more important in determining how the carbohydrates influence your cardiac health. For example, this is giving the simple structure of a carbohydrate. It has an endosperm, which is inside, which is all the starch and the complex, protein, the vitamins. The bran is the external structure, and the germ, it contains the protein, the fatty acids, phytochemicals, etc. So when we remove the bran, and what happens in food processing is this entire bran is removed and it's only the endosperm. For example, if you look at the white bread and the white rice, these are heavily processed, and this is purely the endosperm. So it lacks the protective structure of the bran, which is actually the fiber, which is a very important aspect of the cardiac diet. Now, what you need to understand here is that this can influence, for example, the more it's refined, the glycemic index goes up. So which means that the glycemic index of a brown rice is much lower than that of a white rice. Similarly, the white bread has a worse off glycemic index rather than the brown bread. So these factors of carbohydrate is what is important. So when you consume a lot of refined carbohydrate, it's likely it is going to impact on your adverse cardiac health, rather than consuming a lot of unprocessed food on the grains. Now, regarding the fats, again, the specific type of fats you consume are more important than the total fat. Now, the dietary recommendations are based on very simple biochemistry, is the degree of unsaturation. So just to give you a very simple biochemical example, the saturated fats, they don't contain any double bonds. They're all single bonds. A monounsaturated fat has a single double bond, and a polyunsaturated fat has multiple double bonds. And also the type of double bond depends on the omega fatty acids, which are the fish oils we know about. Now, this is important in the sense that the monounsaturated fatty acids and the polyunsaturated fatty acids are known as they influence the cholesterol homeostasis favorably as compared to the saturated fatty acids. And your diet should have a component of unsaturated fatty acids which replace your saturated fatty acid intake. However, even this factor is being questioned a lot in the recent studies, which again is the basis of controversy in the nutrition world. And if you compare, just to get a broad understanding of the saturated and unsaturated fats, you could see that the well-known canola oil is dominantly, contains very little saturated fat. Coconut oil contains a large amount of saturated fat. So this is the whole lot of the vegetable oils, which the increased consumption of vegetable oils in place of saturated fats, refined grains needs to be encouraged. And these are some of the examples of the vegetable oils: the canola, soybean oil, and the olive oil. Why are virgin oils better? It's because they are refined. The refining takes place at a much lower temperature, which preserves the phenolic compounds. And for example, one of the compounds, which is called as oleocanthal, so this is similar to aspirin, and it has an anti-inflammatory impact. So that is the purported benefit of the extra virgin olive oil. Again, this subject is reeking in controversy, which we shall discuss very briefly. And so this, you can see the whole lot of vegetable oils on the supermarket shelves. Now you can understand the amount of investment by the industry in making the vegetable oils. And just for your information, most of the funding of the the guidelines and the studies comes from the vegetable oil companies. So you could be skeptical on some of the recommendations because the source of funding is from these companies. And finally, the trans fatty acids. These are unsaturated fatty acids with at least a double bond in a trans configuration rather than the cis configuration, which is there in the other fats. And these are the hydrogenated oils which form the basis of why the deep fried goods, the baked foods are not good for your health, because they increase your cholesterol levels very significantly, lower your HDL, good cholesterol, increase your bad cholesterol, and produce what we call as a metabolic syndrome, which can predispose to diabetes. And the micronutrients, very briefly, sodium we know is related to hypertension. Potassium is also related to improved blood pressure homeostasis. In fact, higher potassium intake correlates with better blood pressure control. Antioxidants and vitamins, really there is no role in these supplements. It's no scientific proof that any of these supplements help other than fish oil in a very vague manner. So the functional foods are the probiotics and which are supposed to help in the gut homeostasis, but again, these are all very, very random observational work. The meats, the concerns of the meats. See, both the unprocessed and the processed and the unprocessed red meats have shown adverse cardiac outcomes. This is very, very important. What are the variables in a meat which are actually said to have a negative impact on the health? One is the saturated fat content, the cholesterol, heme, iron, very importantly, sodium, the preservatives, and the diet microbiome interaction. The saturated fat content may not be all that important. Why the meat has the adverse outcome? I think more importantly, it is the heme iron content which has shown to have a cardiotoxicity, and the processed meat have a very high sodium content which can have an adverse effect on your hypertension and heart failure and the negative cardiac impact. There is also a very clear correlation to new onset diabetes with increased consumption of meats. So there is a recommendation to take lean meats, but again, that's being questioned because saturated fat, is it the real enemy? That's the question. So I will discuss the recommendations on what should be the intake in the subsequent slides. The fish, again, the data available is that the 2 servings per week lowered the risk of fatal heart disease. And this is consistent with what we have on the fish oil data, but again, we don't know the industry impact here. So what is advised is the non-fried dark meat like salmon, mackerel, tuna, and shark, better than the white meat fish. So again, 2 servings per week is what is the general recommendation. And this is the slide showing the improved cardiac outcome in patients consuming the fish oil capsules, the PUFA. So it's very obvious the red curve shows a higher mortality and the blue curve shows the control. It's much improved mortality with respect to the control on consuming the fish oil capsules. So the recommendation from the August American Heart Association is that in patients who have no documented CAD, there is no point consuming fish oil capsules, but you should take a variety of oily fish twice a week, not more than that. And the documented coronary artery disease, there is some data that consuming fish oil capsules may be advisable because of the study which has shown that there is an improved mortality in patients with established heart attack. So you have a patient with heart attack, he could be advised fish oil capsules if he doesn't consume fish on a regular basis. However, if he consumes fish on a regular basis, there is no need to take the fish oil supplements. So that's where we are there. And the poultry and eggs, again, a very controversial area. There is a significant influence on the dietary guidelines by the egg boards across the world. In general, there is no significant association with the coronary artery disease events. But however, egg consumption is kind of related to new onset diabetes mellitus. And one of the guarded recommendations is that you have a neutral effect with occasional consumption of eggs, 2 to 3 per week, and harm on a higher consumption, especially in diabetics. The new 2015-2020 guidelines published in the US, they're actually removing cholesterol as a nutrient of importance. So which means that they have allowed egg consumption a bit more without much inhibition. But there was a very important editorial which said that the American Egg Board influenced the decision on such a recommendation. But anyway, these are all the controversies. And the dairy products, the milk, cheese, and yogurt, they are back on the shelves. There is really no need to, the current recommendation is again, the concept of low-fat milk, low-fat yogurt need not be followed because fat is no more the enemy. And it's not a significant enemy, especially in the dairy products. So it has a favorable effect on diabetes, definitely with yogurt and possibly with cheese. And very clearly, they don't cause harm. That's the clarity. The butter is neutral for cardiometabolic risk. It may not be the enemy number one, which has been portrayed. So these are some of the changing scenarios in our environment. We all know fruits and vegetables are very good from every angle. There has been a clear documentation in a lot of population-based and cohort-based analysis that regular consumption of fruits and vegetables are favorable for the cardiometabolic health and in general health. In fact, even on the cancers or atrial fibrillation, everywhere we have an improved outcomes with the increased consumption of this very healthy food. The nut intake, again, very favorable because they improve the oxidative function, they improve the inflammatory and endothelial biomarkers. And the nuts which are being shown to be of import are almonds, hazelnuts, pine nuts, and walnuts. These have consumed in regulated moderate servings. They should be, and a part of the overall diet pattern. They are very helpful. Legumes, again, the cardiac effects is not well established, but as a part of the overall diet pattern, yes, they reduce the consumption of the saturated fat and the refined carbohydrate. And just for information, even coffee beans or legumes, so that's why coffee consumption is not looked down upon. Sugar-sweetened beverages are the most important enemies of the day. They are the single largest source of calories across the globe, and regular consumption of these has been associated with not only obesity, new onset diabetes, and its impact on the cardiac ailment. So the current trend by all the guidelines, by all the societies, is to declare this as the public enemy number one, and we have many countries are imposing taxes on the sugar-sweetened beverages to reduce their consumption and trying to, there is a trend to put a label that they may not be safe for health. So what's the evidence base for these dietary policies across the globe? Mostly from cohort and observational studies using food frequency questionnaires. So such a strategy can be beset with lot of irregularities and incongruities. There are very few randomized control trials. The basis of any proper recommendation is a randomized control trial, where you can have a foolproof data which says, yes, you can do that, you can't do that. But unfortunately, with nutrition science, we don't have that, and we always go by meta-analysis and pool data, fundamentally because most of the studies require big sponsors, and here we have not many sponsors. And the people with big food industries, like the bread industry, or the boards like Egg Board, or the vegetable oil companies, Unilever, P&G, when they sponsor something, it has to be favorable to them, right? So these are busy slides, but I'm just going to give you it is a very important slides. If you look at, this is the data based on which a lot of the recommendations have come in. So this is the meta-analysis of foods and coronary artery disease, stroke and diabetes mellitus. This is from Darish, it's a very elegant paper which was published, and the meta-analysis is very robust. See, when you see this, look at this, just look at this line and look at the dots towards the left and the dots towards the right. So anything towards the left is favorable. So you can see the favorable fruits, vegetables, green leafy vegetables, legumes, grains, nuts and seeds, all of them are very, very favorable to your cardiac health. This is with respect to coronary artery disease. And you look at the other foods, the fish is favorable. Unprocessed red meats, unfavorable. Processed red meats, very unfavorable. You can look at this, it's way out of the mark. White meat, neutral. The dairy is possibly favorable, but neutral. It certainly doesn't do any harm. And if you look at milk and cheese, it's the same thing. It's favorable rather than a harm. And finally, the 100% fruit juice is maybe a little harmful, but if you have to consume fruit juice in place of fruits, yes, a smaller quantity can be done. Sugar-sweetened beverages, significant harm. Coffee, neutral versus positive. And tea is, again, similar to coffee because the whole impact comes on your caffeine intake. And just to highlight this, the unprocessed red meats is very significantly adverse impact. Processed red meats, same ditto. Sugar-sweetened beverages. So these are the basis on which the servings and are being recommended to us. And then if you look at the meta-analysis of the nutrients and coronary artery disease, again, the nutrients, the total carbohydrate, very negative. Glycemic index is high, it's very negative. The total dietary fiber is positive. And as is the other types of fiber, everything is positive. You can notice that it is favorable, which again is the basis for recommending a higher fiber intake. And interestingly, total fat is neutral. So the total fat consumption has really not much of an impact as with respect to a saturated fat, which is pretty negative, and the mono and the polyunsaturated fats are favorable. And especially the omega sources are possibly mildly towards the favorable side. Dietary sodium, significantly negative. And again, highlighting these, carbohydrate, glycemic index, glycemic load, all point to a very negative impact on the cardiac health, as is trans fat and dietary sodium. And this is a very fascinating study which was published very recently called the PURE study published in Lancet as a series of articles. The study is based on a nutrition analysis based on food frequency questionnaires on about 180,000 people globally. And if just one aspect which is very striking, so what is going up is favorable, what is going up is unfavorable, and what is going down is favorable. The only nutrient which is showing a grossly adverse effect is when your food, the energy what you consume is maximally from carbohydrate, the total mortality increases. Interestingly, the fat has shown a favorable impact. So this has stirred a big hornet's nest, which has actually, they have raised a question whether we should eliminate the whole concept of saturated fat, limiting it to only 10% of your total energy. But anyway, controversies will keep coming. Now, what is happening here is, this is an interesting slide which shows why our dietary trials are misguiding us. Now, this is a trial of isolated nutrients, and this is a trial of food-based diet patterns. this was on a women's health initiative. It's a very well done trial, which showed that when there is a usual care and a low-fat diet, there is absolutely no change in the cumulative occurrence of heart disease. So just modifying the diet to a low-fat diet did not make any impact, although the cholesterol levels got down in this patient. Similarly, in a food-based diet pattern, this is a study called the Predimed study based out of the Mediterranean area. It's a fantastic study where they replaced saturated fat with olive oil or nuts, and this clearly showed that as compared to the control, there is a significant improvement in the cardiac risk when you consume higher quantity of unsaturated fatty acids in the basis of olive oil or the nuts. So this exemplifies that an isolated nutrient-based recommendation is no longer valid. For example, reduce your saturated fat to improve your heart risk. No, it needs to be a diet-based advice, which is what is more relevant. So this is where we were wrong, and we were wrong because the nutrition science is quite young. The focus on single nutrient paradigm has been the way we were looking at. Like I told you, cholesterol, heart disease, saturated fat, obesity, vitamin deficiencies. So that's what led to our thinking, but we have realized now that thinking is wrong and that we need to change our way to the food patterns. And so we need to emphasize on specific foods and not individual nutrients in isolation, because the multiplicity of a food pattern will combine together to produce a better environment for your cardiac health. So the overall combination of foods habitually consumed make the dietary pattern. And the 2015 guidelines also emphasize that it's more important to go on a pattern of your food which has a combination of the nutrients and the foods rather than go for an isolated nutrient. It's also important that the dietary pattern will be, it's more easy to ensure compliance of the patient. You're able to explain to them better. They're able to change the food based on the kind of what is available easily and what is available seasonally, and the compliance is much better when you emphasize on a food pattern rather than an isolated nutrient. So some of the common food patterns we know, all of us heard about the DASH diet, the Mediterranean diet, vegetarian, and there's so many others. But I'm only going to dwell on the DASH and the Mediterranean because they have the greatest evidence base with respect to the cardiac health. So the Mediterranean diet, as is clear, is fundamentally evolved in the Mediterranean area. And the basis was actually discovered when they found that in Crete, an island in Greece, the incidence of heart disease was among the lowest in the world. And interestingly, the fat consumption in this part of the world was among the highest. So that formed the basis and investigation and what proved to evolve into a very effective form of a dietary pattern, which is the Mediterranean food pyramid, which emphasizes basically on a daily intake of a good portion of vegetables, fruits, whole wheat grains, olive oil, etc., beans, nuts, and legumes, and with modest amounts of fish and seafood, moderate amounts of poultry, eggs, meats, and sweets less often. In moderation, wine with food and water. So this pattern has actually been more studied in most of the studies, and this is what we call as a secondary prevention study. The secondary prevention is in a person who has already had a heart attack, how can we reduce more heart attacks? So that is secondary prevention, and in such situation, this Lion Diet Heart study has clearly proven that a Mediterranean diet reduces the cardiovascular events significantly as compared to a Western diet, which they gave a good amount of saturated fat in this diet. And this is what is the finding, which is very classic and robust documentation of the importance of unsaturated fatty acids. And in the primary prevention, now if, for example, people, you and I, who didn't have a heart attack, consuming this, will it reduce our heart attack? Yes, this is what the Predimed study showed. This was again a very well-conducted study where they had two sets of populations, one on a controlled diet, what they called as a prudent diet. So they were encouraged to take a low-fat diet. And the experimental diet was a diet either fortified with nuts or with extra virgin olive oil. And what has clearly been shown that there's a 30% reduction in the incidence of cardiac event in the group who were given this unsaturated fatty acids in the form of nuts or olive oil. So again, proving that it can also help as a preventive strategy in a population-based recommendation. The DASH diet is fundamentally studied for the high blood pressure, but it has also a cardiac impact. So it again emphasizes fruits and vegetables, grains, lean protein, legumes and fats and sweets, and low-fat dietary. That was the fundamental basis of the DASH diet, a low-fat dietary, but it's being evolved now to remove this restriction on the recommendation. And with respect to heart disease, it has been well proven in improving BP control, and in the US Nurses' Health Study, it has clearly shown a reduced risk of heart disease and stroke. The vegetarian diet, we presume that it's a vegetarian diet is likely to be very helpful, but there are no studies, population-based studies or cohort-based studies, which have clearly given us the direction, but it is one of the recommendations in the 2015-2020 guidelines that it should be encouraged as a cardiac prevention diet. Now, what are the controversies? The basis for the whole diet-heart hypothesis being questioned now, because the whole diet-heart hypothesis was based on a study called as a 7-country study, the manner in which it was conducted is being questioned. The significant reduction in saturated fat cholesterol consumption has not led to a reduction of deaths due to CAD. This was in the Women's Health Initiative, again conducted in the US. So this is an important observation that all the effort to reduce saturated fat was to reduce cholesterol, but it has not led to reduction in heart disease incidence. And was there a cherry picking of trials which support the hypothesis? We exclude the trials which don't help us. We include the trials which help us. This was exemplified in this very fascinating reanalysis of old data called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, which the blue line is the diet and the dotted line is the control. They were all fed with a very low-fat diet. This was done in multiple mental hospitals across Minnesota. What is important to notice is that there is absolutely no significant difference between the people who had a dietary intervention and who did not have a dietary infection. And when you look at the more important susceptible age of more than 65, the group in which there was a significant reduction in cholesterol had a higher mortality. So this data has been reanalyzed and published now, and this is, again, the basis of the lot of bad press the guidelines are getting, and the number of books written by people going against the whole saturated fat hypothesis. So what is the industry conflict in these guidelines? The American Heart Association gets a significant funding from Procter & Gamble, which the original makers of the Crisco vegetable oil. I was also not very much aware of this, but the P&G virtually launched American Heart Association in 1948, relaunched with a donation of $1.5 million. And Bayer, the makers of Liberty soya bean, which is the soya oil is the largest selling oil apparently in the US, has pledged a significant amount. So, and the several proponents of the guideline of the current policy have industry affiliations or board memberships. So this is an example that the industry conflicts which are there with the main people who are advocating the saturated fat should be replaced with unsaturated fats. You can see the whole lot of boards and commissions which are paying their lecture fees and sponsorship amounts, etc. And also the funding of the research has been dominantly by Unilever, which is one of the largest producers of vegetable oils. And this led to a publication, The Big Fat Surprise. I'm sure many of us would have read this very fascinating book by Nina Tickholz. And these are the headlines which speak for themselves, which came after that and which are continuing. The war is continuing. There was, again, a fantastic review in British Medical Journal just a couple of months back, which has questioned many of these studies, especially the Minnesota coronary experiment. And the Pure study, which was published very recently, has again thrown a major controversy in this area of whether saturated fat is really the evil. And you could see the headlines again in the various newspapers. Please don't take low-fat diet. The butter is better than margarine. And obviously, this raked up so much controversy that people started questioning the relevance of this study in selected populations. But anyway, I will not go into those details. These are very confusing. But it's, again, all this is being re-examined. So if you look at the broad areas of concordance and controversy related to diet and heart health, this will, the final slides, concluding slides, the benefits of fruits, non-starchy vegetables, nuts, legumes, yogurt, Mediterranean diet or higher fat diet, there is a concordance that yes, it is beneficial. There is no doubt about it. Now, coming down to seafood, whole grains, yes, there is a general concordance that it is beneficial. Now, on the whole fat milk, coconut oil, starchy vegetables, and potatoes, there is an insufficient evidence for meaningful conclusion, which is, again, a war between the coconut oil industry and the vegetable oil industry. Now, the harm. Again, there is a concordance that there is a significant harm of partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, the trans fats, the processed meats, high sodium, sugar-sweetened beverages, and greater than moderate alcohol use. I didn't dwell too much on the alcohol because I didn't really think it is a food, so we can take it up in questions if you want. So there is a broad concordance that these are really harmful. Now, whether whole fat milk is harmful, there is insufficient evidence. So the industry has spent a lot of money in making the skim milk and the 2% and the 1% milks. So this is not going to be favorably looked upon because it takes much more money to make those the special milks for us. So these are the areas of concordance. And again, there is a little effect of total effect. That is, people are now convinced about it. There is a little effect of total carbohydrate. So what is important is the quality of carbohydrate. There is little effect of isolated antioxidant vitamins and calcium. So you could please take your Centrum Silver off the shelves. There is little effect of 100%. There is a controversy on the 100% fruit juice, the total protein, specific amino acids, and non-calorie sweeteners. And there is no evidence that the local, organic, farmed, grass-fed, genetic modified foods are helpful or not. So going and paying the extra buck for an organic food, maybe is it not worth it? We don't know. So, but that is the evidence. Even the grass-fed, stuff is. So now, what are the dietary priorities for cardiometabolic health? Summarizing, you consume more fruits, 3 servings per day, nuts and seeds, 4 servings per week, vegetables including legumes, 3 servings per day, whole grains, 3 servings per day, in place of refined grains. So these are all the examples of what a serving is. And consume more fish and shellfish, 2 or more servings per week. Dairy products, especially yogurt and cheese, you could take 2 to 3 servings every day. Vegetable oils, 2 to 6 servings per day, based on the current guidelines. But like I told you, the whole data on the vegetable oils and unsaturated fats is being re-examined and fought bitterly. Consume less of refined grains, starches, added sugars, no more than 1 to 2 servings per day. Consume less processed meats, no more than 1 serving per week. Unprocessed red meats, no more than 2 to 3 servings per week. Industrial trans fat, don't eat. Sugars, sweetened beverages, don't drink. Sodium, no more than 2,000 milligrams per day. But again, this is being questioned because there's been some recent data which said that people who consume very little sodium are more prone to infections, are more prone to illness. And whether the recommendation of such a low sodium is actually right or not has been questioned by Dr. Salim Yusuf from Hamilton. He's done some wonderful epidemiologic work on the whole nutrition paradigm, and this is being very much questioned again. So thank you very much. So Hippocrates way back told the let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. That's very right. Treat it like medicine, consume in moderation. Thank you very much.